Hello, this is Monica Reinagel, and you're listening to the Nutrition Diva podcast. But today I have something special to share with you. First off, I want to introduce you to Chelsea Dorcich. Chelsea is the brand new host of the Project Parenthood podcast, which is also part of the Quick and Dirty Tips Network that publishes the Nutrition Diva podcast. Chelsea has worked with kids and families for over 25 years as a therapist, a developmental specialist, and a special education teacher. She does a lot of work with ADHD, autism, and anxiety in kids and adolescents, but she also has a particular passion for working with parents who are in need of additional support. So I really can't think of anyone better to take over as the new host of the Project Parenthood podcast. In this episode, you're also going to meet my good friend and registered dietitian, Jill Castle. Jill is a specialist in children's nutrition, and she's recently published an important new book called Kids Thrive at Every Size. Even if you don't have kids yourself, I bet you know someone who needs to hear about this. Today's parents face an increasingly fraught challenge. We are bombarded with media messages about the dangers of growing childhood obesity, but at the same time, we live in a society rife with weight bias and stigma. This is a real tightrope walk for parents. How do we promote health without fixating on numbers on a scale or appearance? How do we protect our kids from the real health consequences of excess weight, while also shielding them from the equally dangerous threat of eating disorders? How do we raise kids that are healthy not just in body, but in mind and spirit? And these are exactly the questions that Jill tackles so artfully in her book. When I got the advanced copy of Jill's new book, I knew that Chelsea would want to interview Jill on her Project Parenthood podcast, and she indeed jumped at that chance. And that interview is what I want to share with you today. So without further delay, here is the conversation between Chelsea and Jill, and I'll be back at the end with some concluding thoughts and information on where you can find more resources.
Jill Castle is one of our nation's premier nutrition experts. She's a speaker, advisor, and media contributor, inspiring parents, healthcare professionals, and organizations that serve children and families to use a whole child approach. You can catch her on the Nourish Child podcast. And her latest book, Kids Thrive at Every Size, spoke to me both as a mother of three and therapist. And I'm so honored to say that we have her on our show today. So welcome, Jill, and thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
Yeah. So when I first started reading The Kids Thrive at Every Size, I was brought back to my days. Was a developmental specialist. I used to work a lot in the home, and I worked with a multidisciplinary team, and we used that approach to serve the family and the child and get all corners. And I couldn't help but think about this whole child it so touched on that we were looking at every single layer. We weren't brushing anything under the rug. We're really attending to every dynamic our children are faced with today. And I love that. I feel like anyone reading this could walk away making sure that their children were going to be seen and really truly seen and validated, and they had the tools to do so. So I was hoping you could kind of tell our listeners a little bit more about this whole child approach.
Yeah. So to me, I'm with you, Chelsea. Like, it's the whole child. I've raised 4 of my own kids. It's not only their physical health, it's their emotional well-being. And how does their cognitive development play into everything? How does their social emotional development play into things? And how can we help parents sort of widen the lens from just food as the solution to raising healthy kids and really look at we've got movement, we've got sleep, we've got family culture, we've got teaching our kids actively to love themselves so that they practice self-care as they get older. And I really wanted to bring all of that into this book because I think many parents today are raising kids in a society that has a lot of sort of binaries about bodies and food and health. And it's you're either healthy or you're not healthy. There's no nuance in between. And there's actually quite a lot of nuance, which I tried to highlight in this book. But yeah, I think we have to always look at the whole child, because if we are only looking through a lens of physical health, for example, we risk missing out on their emotional well-being. And we know that lots of things can happen as they grow up in terms of their relationship with themselves, their bodies, food, their relationships with others, how they feel about the skin they're in. And I'm not willing to risk that in kids. I just feel like we really need to start tending to that as well as their physical health.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, it just reminds me of just when we approach like black and white thinking. And I think that's what you're saying. I feel like there's a lot of us even maybe who grew up that way. It's either healthy or it's not, or there's no middle ground. And like you said, it's either your one size is good or bad. And it's not that. It's just, there's so many other components and so many layers. And I love you say just even future relationship with yourself. So what their kids are growing into. And I know you brought into that intergenerational feeding. And I think about how, as therapists, we do a lot of intergenerational work and as parents, even ourselves, right? It doesn't even not just in this scope, but what are we bringing to the table for our kids just with what we experience and whether we liked it or didn't like it. And we sometimes maybe overindulge or over restrict due to those nuances we learned as we were growing up.
Yeah, I always tell my clients, we all come to the table with our own stuff. And I was raised with the Clean Plate Club. I've been very sort of transparent about that in my work over time. And my oldest child, I tried to do the Clean Plate Club with her, and it did not work at all. And I had to sort of relearn how to parent around food and use positive feeding strategies and tactics that really enable autonomy to develop and self-trust around food and what kids like to eat and really helping parents own the job of, it's exposure, it's adventure, it's your value as a parent isn't tied to what your child eats. Your value is exposing your children to all these different foods, creating a family environment around the table that is supportive and loving and fun and adventurous, and really building those family connections and community through food is one of the tenets of this book.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I love that. And I love just breaking it down to those 8 pillars. Is that, I don't know where, I know that we can get into so much detail with those, but I don't know if there's anything like we could do a summarize, but the 8 pillars were really just part of this whole child approach. And you kind of already touched on a lot of them right there. But just anything else we can share about, because those, I just loved how you broke it down that way. And for me as a therapist, even working with my families that I work with, but just even as a parent, being able to kind of check those boxes and see, like, making sure, okay, where are we thriving, where are we maybe striving, and where can we learn a little bit more?
Yeah. So the 8 pillars of wellness, I thought long and hard about how I wanted to showcase this book. I'm known for the research that I do, but I'm also known for the practicality that I bring to the things that I write. And I wanted to write something prescriptive because I know a lot of parents out there are like, tell me how to do it. And so the other thing that I wanted to sort of focus in on are how do I blend physical health, raising kids who are healthy, because parents really want that, and who are emotionally well. And I landed on these habits and attitudes of health and well-being. And those are the 8 pillars. So I start with family culture, because your family culture is the most important culture your child will ever be exposed to. And so that is who you are as a family, what you do as a family, what you believe, what your values are, what your attitudes are. And so kids come in all shapes and sizes. We want kids who are in a variety of different bodies to feel seen and accepted and loved unconditionally, right? So we go through that in that pillar. How do you actually build a family culture that supports your child no matter what, no matter their size? And the second is sleep. That's a fast win for parents, like just setting up sleep hygiene. And it's one of, I think, the easiest things parents can succeed at with the biggest payoff in terms of physical health and emotional well-being. Then we get into movement. Everybody probably knows that movement is part of, raising a healthy child. But actually, how do you instill that on a day-to-day basis when you're working and you've got multiple kids doing multiple things and life is chaotic and crazy? So we go through how you can actually get that set up at an early age. After movement, it's feeding, which is that parent job of feeding children, the interaction, which you alluded to earlier. The next pillar is eating. So how do we build healthy eating habits in children? How do we understand children's appetites? How do we help them understand their appetite and really be good at self-regulating their eating based on their internal body knowledge of their appetite. Then we talk about food, which is just one pillar. And I'll just emphasize, I like to say it's just one piece of the pie. It's not the whole recipe or the whole pie. But we talk about food in more inclusive ways. And I call out a lot of food shaming out there and really help parents to develop more of a neutral attitude about food and look at food through a nutrient lens, because kids are growing and developing. Their bodies are constantly changing. And there are lots of nutrients that are highly needed during childhood. And if we can focus on the nutrients, then we can get disentangled from ultra processed or not organic. We can let these sort of pressures from the world around us lighten up a little bit and just get this. Our job is to raise kids who are eating nutritious food. So how do we balance all of that and be flexible with it too? Mm-hmm. And then I get into screens, which are, from video games to social media, that, how do you raise a child who can regulate their viewing in that area? And then last is self-love. And that's the final pillar. And it's sort of a call to action pillar. All children need to develop self-love, because when you love yourself and your body, you're going to take care of it. And I believe that parents today really need to be actively cultivating self-love in their children. And so I go through how to help parents cultivate that in their kids.
One of my favorite things is that you brought in the science behind, the research behind all these pillars. You brought in obstacles, like you were realistic, like what are we going to face as like parents today, and that not every family looks the same, and what are some of those obstacles that are come up. And then these were practical and easily applicable interventions that you set up. And that was I think that was probably my favorite part, just to be broken down like that. Because you're right, all parents, at least when I come to my office as well, they want very specific directions and prescriptions of okay, what do I do with this? And so it's just, to me, this is just, there's so many different cases that come into my mind that it could apply to all of them. There's such different cases for families. And I think this book just covers it. And my favorite was just a couple of the themes that I think we talk about on this podcast too, is just the modeling we do as parents, and just and the way we talk, the way we act, or, the actions even speak louder than the words, but just how we're talking to ourselves, or like you said, about eating, about the food we're eating. How are we actually modeling what we're saying to our kids? And I think that it does go such a long way. And that was one of probably my favorite things to say. And that you also added that there's room for repair too, which is what we talk a lot about too, just that it's okay, we can reset here, and this is what we can kind of do moving forward.
Yeah, exactly. And at the end of each pillar, I categorize readers into learners who are just learning about, you might just be learning about screens or just be learning about eating habits. So you would be starting off, with very practical tools, but you could be a striver, meaning that you have a lot of good stuff in place, but you need to sort of up level a little bit and do a little more work. And then you have, the thriver level, which is you've got this nailed down. Don't worry about sleep. Your kid's sleeping great. He's getting good quality sleep. And, you want to keep in mind as they grow and develop and their circadian rhythm shifts, for example. Mm-hmm. But don't worry about these pillars that you're doing great at. Focus on the ones that need work, because there's just a lot of things parents can do to raise healthy kids. It's not just feeding them a healthy meal. There are lots of things that can be done.
Absolutely. I agree. I think, like you spoke on, just even that building of their inner compass, you're building that for them too, and just helping them feel more empowered with these situations. So it's not just about the food, like you said, in front of them, but just how are we approaching it? Our connection to our children, that relationship. And that doesn't even have to be food centered. It's our relationship in general. So I was thinking a lot about how perfectionism, I think that kind of touched on, because we see that so much today, and it comes across with social media, it comes across with body types, everything. And just how you really hit on, it was, I can't, if I might misquote you, but just as talking about trying not to ace this test, right? When we were, and just trying to be, like you said, just practical and just realistic of it's day by day, it's moment by moment. But if we're striving for that perfectionism, we're kind of setting not only ourselves up, but our children up for that failure, and or even a not so great relationship around food and body image.
Yeah, exactly. And I think perfectionism also sends a significant message to our kids around, nobody's perfect, right? And if you're expecting perfectionism, it's like you're telling your child that, you're only lovable if you're perfect. And that is not the message that we want to send our kids, because our kids are getting that message outside the home. Yep. Day in and day out, they're getting bombarded with that kind of messaging. We want our kids to feel like their homes are safe, their parents love them no matter what, that they're supportive. And even, in my work with families, I hands down feel like every parent loves and supports their child. But sometimes we get into patterns where we overvalue appearance, or we overvalue eating fruits and vegetables. And I'm not saying that that's not valuable. It is valuable, but getting too caught up in serving a perfect meal, or having a perfect body, or having perfect eating habits, or perfect, physical activity habits. We don't need to be perfect, but we want to strive for all of these different areas that build physical health and emotional well-being. And I think, as a healthcare provider, what I observe is that over the decades that I've been practicing, there's just been an over focus on physical health. And of course, we want to raise healthy kids. I'm not minimizing that, but I think we've lost sight of the fact that we should be conscious of their emotional well-being too, in the midst of rising levels of anxiety and depression and body dissatisfaction. And I think that as parents, we need to, have a balance. We need to be equally emphasizing that emotional well-being as well.
Right. It's definitely, like you said, we're promoting physical health, but not at the sacrifice of our other health, like our emotional health. And you're right, there's a rise of anxiety and depression, suicide, disordered eating. And even with disordered eating, every clinical case I've seen, it's not just the eating. There's so many other layers. It's so many other aspects to that, that then this is, I think, again, why I'm just so just googly-eyed over this book, is just that because it touches on all those layers that we definitely tend to either minimize or kind of forget about, or just they haven't been, put in the light enough. But one of the things I think that is maybe even the diplomatic feeding style. I really appreciate that, just having that balance of, structure and routine and boundaries. I was wondering if maybe we could touch a little bit on that.
Sure. I love that topic. I call it's diplomatic feeding style. That's the terminology you'll find in the research. Oftentimes with my parents, I call it love with limits, because you're loving and considerate, but you're still setting those boundaries and those limits. And I always want parents to feel empowered to be able to say no, because today's parents oftentimes feel bad about saying, no, you can't have more cookies. You've had enough. Yep. And parents do need to feel empowered to have, some level of control over food in the home, because when kids are in charge of the food in the home, it typically doesn't go well, right? Kids like what they like. They want to eat what they want to eat. They're not like, oh, I've never tried Brussels sprouts. I'll have some of those today. It's the parent who has to be guiding and governing food within the home. And so diplomatic feeding really emphasizes structure, regular meal times, a regular place for eating meals and snacks. And boundaries are the no's or the limits or the not nows that parents need to say. And one of my favorites is the kitchen is closed. It's like, we've just had lunch. We're not having anything else to eat until snack time. The kitchen's closed right now, and obviously, there's nuance with that. And for some children, that's going to be really well received. For other children, they might push back a little bit, and parents might have a harder time emphasizing that. But the idea is that there are routines and rhythms with food in the home that the child can expect. They're predictable and that leave the diplomacy and the control with the parent or the caretaker.
Yeah, no, I agree. I love the just your examples of the not yet, or just because you're right. I think it's, as a parent, especially depending on what's going on that day, we can tie so much guilt to that simple no, right? Like it can just be like, oh gosh, well, I already took this away, or I already missed this today, so maybe I can say yes here. It's just this, and I think even but those examples were they spoke to me, and even my youngest, who was born with so many food allergies, I noticed I had a completely different approach. It was like this overindulgent approach, because it was just like, fine, you're hungry, you want to eat this? Okay. Like, it was like you didn't ever want to say no to him, because there's so much, he was only so much he could eat to begin with. So, but then it was like, oh, but then I started seeing the patterns with the other kids too. So it's trying to have that diplomacy across the whole household. But one of my favorite things that came out of that too was the yo-yo. We do something, so we call it hodgepodge at my house, but like, it's like the yo-yo, just having a night like that is just it. And that's so much freedom. And I'll let you talk a little bit more about that, but just have that freedom, I think, from you as a parent or caregiver, putting food on the table, but also the children having more autonomy and independence in creating that meal.
Yeah. So yo-yo stands for you're on your own. And my kids today, who are in their 20s, they're like, oh, it's a yo-yo night. So they loved it because they could pick what they wanted to eat. I would say, this is what we have. You can have leftovers. You can, make a sandwich if you want. And as they got older, if you want to make scrambled eggs, you can, or pancakes, whatever. But yo-yo means mom and dad are off the hook for the night, and you're making your own dinner. Really fun when they're older, like, school age to middle school age, when they are really in the throes of developing their autonomy and their self-esteem. And so, the flip side to a lot of these recommendations are that they are building key developmental milestones that we want to see develop at specific times. So for yo-yo, when you do it with a school-age child or a middle school child, you're literally allowing them to tap into their autonomy. You're teaching them a skill which builds their self-esteem. Yes. And so it's not just a transaction with food that you're trying to, like, I'm off the hook, you're on the hook. It's not that. There are milestones that many of these recommendations build in children.
Oh, absolutely. I agree. I think that just the examples you gave too, is including them in actually like menu, or like I thought of, actually going to the store and having them participate, even though I know sometimes that can be stressful for some parents, because the kids want to, put everything in the cart that it was not on the list, but like, or even going to the farmer's market and letting them like pick out the vegetables of the week, or, okay, this is what's kind of on the menu, or do you want to pick something on the menu? But I love that you, like you said, even from the beginning, just taking into the cognitive development too. And you touched a lot on executive functioning skills. And one of my favorite, homework assignments or practice assignments for families with children with ADHD is just to have, I'll say, I need them to like have you, whether they pick the recipe or not, but they're going to actually make, whether it's baking or cooking, but they're going to make something with you from beginning to start. They're going to help organize all the materials. They're going to help organize all the supplies you need, right? And just to have them in, and it does so much more too on what you've been talking about, these pillars, just having that connection and having the autonomy and really having that positive relationship with just what's involved with your body, nutrition and eating. I just love that you touched on the executive functioning skills and just being aware, that curious mindset. I know I love to use that word a lot, curious, and I love that word, just to be curious too about your children and what they have eaten, what they haven't eaten, or just their mannerisms around food.
Yeah. Or what they think of this or that. And just even the simple question, what did you think about this? It could be dinner. It could be the walk that you took after dinner. It could be the show that you watched. What did you think? Yeah. Just engaging that conversation can be so helpful for children, because they're seen, they're heard, they're thinking, they're learning. Right. So much of it, so layered.
So layered. Yes. I love that. And I think, the other thing I was thinking about was the blahs. I think that's like one of the things, especially like I was just thinking, coming off of my kids just started back at school, but coming off the summer break, depending on what we're doing in a day, the blahs I feel like could come out a lot more.
Yeah. So the blahs are boredom, loneliness, I'm forgetting off the top of my head what is.
Avoidance. Yes, that's
avoidance. H is habit, and S is situation. So the BLAs are sort of an acronym for why kids eat. Mm-hmm. And many kids today are not eating for their appetite. They're eating for the BLAs. They're bored. They're lonely. They're avoiding their emotions. They have developed a habit of coming home from school and going right into the pantry and taking, everything they want that they see that they like. Or situational. They're at a party. They're, at a sleepover. Mm-hmm. So there are lots of reasons why kids eat. And I love that chapter because I don't think really anybody talks about building healthy eating habits. And in order to build them, you really have to understand what's going on with appetite. You got to understand the obstacles that, kids are bombarded every day with food and just all the really helping children tune into their bodies, be more mindful with eating, and trusting that they can let their internal barometer or compass, what you said, can really tell them, help inform when to eat, when to stop, and all of those things. But parents need to understand all the different things that go into eating. Like there are just a lot of kids that are eating for non-appetite related reasons.
Yes, it has nothing to do with their actually being hungry. And yes, because you did tap into, so if some listeners pick up the book, it definitely goes into more detail about just the different types of responsiveness and things that we have with in terms of appetite, and be able to read that. But maybe just even close out with, I think mindfulness was such a big piece too. I think just even if it was highlighted in one area, I think it goes across all the pillars, just to be as parents ourselves mindful and that modeling, but just for our kids to take that pause in that moment, just to almost appreciate and really actually notice what it is that they're eating, and or if they are hungry, if they are full. And I'm just curious if that when that actually started to play a role in your practice, or if it was in your home first before you actually started, recommending it to your clients. Or
mindfulness. Oh yeah. I do the mindful eating practice a lot with my clients, particularly the ones in their teen years, because I tend to focus with the parents a little bit more when the kids are younger, because I don't want any child to feel bad about seeing the dietitian,
Absolutely, yes.
But with adolescents, I do that practice a lot. And one of the funniest comments, one of the teens that I was working with, we went through this mindfulness practice and we were halfway through it. And I guide parents through this practice in the book. So listeners can go and do this with their kids themselves. But this one teenage girl said, when we were halfway through, she's like, wow, this just takes so long to eat a Hershey Kiss. And I thought that was so funny, because it is really testimony to the fact that a lot of kids just eat and don't pay attention to the process, the flavor, the sensations in their mouth and their stomach. I mean, it is a process to eat, and to be mindful is to really clue into all of those different sensory qualities around food and what's going on in your body.
Absolutely. I love it, because I can't tell you how many times I've heard kids say, like, I don't remember finishing this. Did I finish this? Like, did you take it away? I'm like, you finished that. So I'm like, okay, we need to slow down with how we're eating. Yes. It's going so quickly. So I definitely want to make sure our listeners know how to, where they can find your book. I did want to highlight too that yesterday, I know CNN came out with a beautiful article about the book too. And it was so nice very exciting to see that definitely produced and marketed out. And really, I'm hoping it just gets to as many families as possible, because this book, like I said, is, like we said off the record, is just, to me, I'm like equating it to my Bible for home and my practice. It's so amazing. So thank you so much for giving us all these tools. So how can we find your book?
Yeah, well, it's available wherever books are sold, Amazon, your local bookstores, big box, small box, independent bookstores. It should be out there. And if it's not there, ask for it.
Okay.
So that it can be stocked. But you can also find more about the book on my website, thenourishedchild.com, or on my private practice personal website, jillcastle.com. I have pages there on both of them. And it will link you right to wherever you want to buy books. And
Okay,
that's
great.
that's how
And
you can find it.
Also find you on your podcast, correct?
Yes, my podcast, The Nourished
Okay.
Child, and I'm on Instagram and Facebook and all the places. So it's out there.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jill, for taking time out of your day to enlighten all of us.
Thank you so much, Chelsea. It was great to talk with you.
Thank you.
As we've heard in this conversation, raising healthy children in today's world is no small feat. It's not just about what's on our plates or the number on the scale. It's about fostering a positive relationship with food, promoting self-love and acceptance, and building resilience against harmful societal messages. Now, for those of us without children, this information is still incredibly relevant because we all play a role in shaping the environment in which children grow up, whether that's as aunts like me, uncles, teachers, grandparents, or community members. Understanding these concepts can help all of us create a more supportive and health-promoting world for the next generation. If you'd like to dig deeper into these topics, I highly recommend picking up a copy of Jill's book. It's called Kids Thrive at Every Size. You'll find it anywhere books are sold, and the link is also in the show notes for today's episode. And I also encourage you to check out Chelsea's Project Parenthood podcast for more of her insightful conversations on raising healthy, happy children. And don't miss Jill Castle's own podcast. It's called The Nourished Child, where she regularly shares her expertise on children's nutrition and wellness. And of course, links to all these fantastic resources are in the show notes for today. I'll be back next week with a regular episode of the Nutrition Diva podcast. If you have a question you'd like me to answer, you can email it to me. My email address is nutrition@quickanddirtytips.com. You can also leave me a voicemail if you like, and the number for that is 443-961-6206. Nutrition Diva is a Quick and Dirty Tips podcast, and my team there includes Brandon Getchis, Nathan Sems, Davina Tomlin, Morgan Christensen, and Holly Hutchings. Thanks as always for listening. I'll see you next week.